Publicly disgraced and handcuffed, Alara Vance watched her mentor's legacy crumble, convinced she'd been utterly betrayed. But then he appeared. Not as the stranger she'd once feared, but as a shadow of absolute power. Alessandro Rossi, the city's ruthless mafia boss, didn't just expose her tormentor. He claimed her gallery, and her future in a single breathtaking declaration. She was saved, but now irrevocably she was his. The Aegis Gallery, once a sanctuary of hushed whispers and profound beauty, now sagged beneath the weight of overdue invoices and unspoken despair. Alara Vance ran a trembling hand over the tarnished brass plate beside the heavy oak door. The engraved letters, founded by Arthur Finch, 1948, feeling less like a legacy and more like a tombstone. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak autumn sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the pervasive neglect that gnawed at the gallery's once lustrous soul. The air, thick with the scent of old paper, fading oil paints, and the faint, melancholic aroma of decay, pressed down on her, a suffocating blanket woven from her failures. It had been 3 years since Arthur, her beloved mentor, had passed, leaving her the gallery, a mountain of debt, and a promise she felt utterly incapable of keeping. He believed in her keen eye for forgotten masterpieces, her delicate touch in restoration, her unwavering passion for art itself. Now that belief felt like a cruel joke. The once vibrant street, a bastion of independent spirits, was slowly but inexorably ceding to the relentless march of gentrification. Chic sterile cafes and soulless chain stores had begun to sprout like malignant fungi, replacing the quirky boutiques and family-run trattorias. The Aegis Gallery, with its peeling facade and defiant charm, was an anomaly, a dying ember in a rapidly commercializing landscape. Alara moved through the cavernous space, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the worn parquet floors. Her worn jeans and oversized sweater were a stark contrast to the elegant gowns and sharp suits that once graced these halls. She paused before a canvas, a half-finished landscape by a local artist, its vibrant greens and blues mocking her inner turmoil. A faint tremor ran through her, a constant companion these days. Every morning, the same routine, boiling a cup of instant coffee that tasted of ash, then diving into the stack of bills on her ancient oak desk in the small, cluttered office at the back. Each envelope was a fresh wound, a new reminder of her deepening abyss. Property taxes had inexplicably skyrocketed in the last 6 months, a crippling, targeted blow that felt less like coincidence and more like a carefully orchestrated attack. She knew deep in her gut who was behind it. Mr. Aldrich. His name, even whispered in the lonely quiet of the gallery, left a bitter taste on her tongue. Aldrich, the impeccably tailored predator who saw neighborhoods not as communities but as commodities. He'd made polite, then increasingly insistent, offers to buy the gallery, offers she'd vehemently refused. Each refusal was met with a new, insidious pressure. A threatening note tucked under the door, the glass of a small display case, inexplicably cracked one morning, the for sale signs that mysteriously appeared overnight on her storefront, quickly torn down by her furious aunts. The local police, when she'd called, had shrugged. Vandalism, Ms. Vance. Happens all the time. But Alara knew. She felt his calculating eyes on her, always. He was tightening the noose, slowly, patiently, waiting for her to break. And she was perilously close. Just breathe, Alara, she murmured to herself, her voice a reedy whisper in the vast emptiness. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure Arthur's comforting presence, his gentle smile, the scent of turpentine and wisdom that always clung to him. He would have known what to do. But Arthur was gone, and she was alone, adrift in a sea of red ink and silent threats. Her only beacon, a desperate, flickering hope, lay wrapped in aged muslin in the gallery's hidden strong room, a small, unassuming chamber behind a false bookshelf in her office. She'd spent weeks researching it, poring over dusty texts and brittle newspaper clippings. The Obsidian Heart, a Mesoamerican sculpture, no bigger than her palm, carved from pure, jet-black obsidian. Its surface was smooth, cool to the touch, yet intricately etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under the gaze. Ancient, powerful, and rumored to carry a potent curse, it had been a gift to Arthur decades ago, hidden away, almost forgotten. Its value, according to her exhaustive research, was immeasurable. It could save the gallery. It could erase the debt. It could buy her time, but the thought of selling it, of parting with such a magnificent, enigmatic piece of history, twisted her stomach. It felt like a betrayal of Arthur's passion, a final surrender to the very forces he'd fought against. Her fingers traced the cold, smooth lines of the obsidian. The legend spoke of misfortune befalling its owners, of dark secrets and darker desires. Was she really desperate enough to invite a curse into her already cursed life? The irony was not lost on her. She needed the money from a potentially cursed object to save a place that felt blessed by the spirit of art, yet haunted by the ghost of her mentor's expectations. A sudden sharp rap on the outer gallery door made her jump, a frantic beat hammering against her ribs. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. It was late. Too late for casual browsers, too early for a planned delivery. The sound echoed again, louder, more insistent this time, rattling the glass in its frame. Her breath hitched. Aldrich? Had he finally grown tired of his slow, torturous game? Or was it something else, something even more sinister, drawn by the very artifact she clutched? A cold dread, a nameless, primal fear, coiled in her stomach. She knew she shouldn't open it. She should ignore it, pretend she wasn't there. But a desperate, almost reckless curiosity, a sliver of stubborn defiance, warred with her terror. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour with such chilling authority? With the obsidian still clutched tightly in her hand, its cool surface feeling strangely comforting against her clammy palm, Elara slowly, cautiously, walked towards the door, the unsettling thudding sound still reverberating through the desolate gallery. Each step was heavy, laden with the weight of her crumbling world, and the terrifying unknown that lay just beyond the aged oak. Her fingers brushed the cold brass handle, her gaze fixed on the distorted reflection in the glass panel, bracing herself for whatever nightmare awaited. The storm outside raged with a primal fury, mirroring the tempest brewing within Elara's soul. Rain lashed against the arched windows of the Aegis gallery, each fat drop drumming a relentless rhythm against the old glass, threatening to shatter the fragile piece she desperately clung to. Thunder, a guttural growl from the heavens, rattled the very foundations of the building, sending tremors through the already unstable shelves. Candles, lit for atmosphere and out of necessity after a flickering power outage, cast dancing shadows that elongated and distorted the ancient statues, transforming familiar masterpieces into grotesque sentinels of her solitude. Elara ignored the chaos, her focus absolute. Hunched over a velvet-lined work table in the strong room, she delicately cleaned the obsidian heart, her breath held in quiet reverence. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and her own faint fear mingled with the earthy aroma of the ancient obsidian. Its cool, unforgiving surface felt like an anchor in the swirling anxiety that threatened to drown her. Under the focused beam of her restoration lamp, the intricate glyphs etched into its surface seemed to pulse with a low, malevolent energy. Legends whispered of dark cults, of blood sacrifices, and of its cursed nature. Misfortune to all who possess it. She scoffed inwardly, a bitter, humorless sound. What more misfortune could possibly befall her? Losing the gallery, losing Arthur's legacy, it was already her damnation. But the sheer value of the artifact, the salvation it promised, overshadowed any lingering superstition. She had to believe it. It was her last, desperate gamble. A sudden sharp clang from the main gallery jolted her upright, sending a jolt of icy fear through her veins. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Had the storm finally broken something? Or had Aldrich, in his insatiable greed, decided to forego subtlety? She grabbed the nearest, heaviest object, a bronze paperweight shaped like a lion's head, her knuckles white. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing with an unnerving confidence that spoke not of furtive intrusion, but of undeniable dominion. Her breath hitched. He stood framed in the archway of the strong room, silhouetted against the dim, flickering light of the main gallery. Alessandro Rossi, a name whispered with reverence and dread in the hushed corners of Chicago's underworld. He wasn't bleeding, not physically, but his very presence was a weapon. Tall, broad-shouldered, he filled the space, his expensive charcoal gray suit, though slightly damp from the rain, clinging to his powerful frame like a second skin. Dark hair, slicked back but with a few rebellious strands falling across his forehead, framed a face sculpted from sharp angles and an almost predatory elegance. But it was his eyes that seized her, drawing the air from her lungs. They were the color of storm-swept seas, deep and fathomless, holding an intelligence that was both chilling and utterly captivating. They swept over the scattered tools, the ancient texts, the obsidian heart clutched in her hand, and finally settled on her. That, he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, belongs to my family. No question, no polite request. A declaration. a command. His gaze, devoid of emotion yet brimming with an unspoken authority, made her feel exposed, vulnerable. Despite the lion's head clutched in her hand, Ilara's spine stiffened. Fury, hot and defiant, surged through her, momentarily eclipsing her fear. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "This is my gallery, and this artifact was legally acquired by my mentor decades ago." Alessandro took a slow, measured step closer, the expensive leather of his shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. The subtle, masculine scent of expensive cologne, hints of cedar and something wild, filled the small space, intoxicating and unsettling. "Legally acquired," he repeated, a hint of amusement, cold and sharp as ice, playing at the corners of his lips. "A charming sentiment, Miss Vance. Especially from a woman whose gallery is drowning in debt, threatened by a shark named Aldrich, and on the verge of foreclosure." Her blood ran cold. How could he possibly know? The intimate details of her financial ruin, the name of her tormentor. Panic, raw and visceral, clawed at her throat. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" she demanded, her voice a desperate, strangled whisper. He merely smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips that sent a shiver down her spine. "I am the man who came to reclaim what is mine, and incidentally, to ensure that Arthur Finch's legacy doesn't fall into the hands of a glorified slumlord." The obsidian heart was stolen from the Rossi family vault in the 1920s. A petty theft, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but certain possessions hold more than monetary value. They hold history, blood, honor. He paused, his eyes, dark pools of conviction, boring into hers. "And you, Miss Vance, are standing in the way of its return." He then did something utterly disarming. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a sleek, silver smartphone. With a single, elegant thumbstroke, he showed her a screen. Her eyes widened in disbelief. It was a detailed, up-to-the-minute breakdown of the Aegis Gallery's finances, the overdue mortgage payments, the exorbitant property taxes, even the small, personal loan she'd taken out to keep the lights on last month. The figures, stark and unforgiving, screamed her humiliation. Then a new notification flashed on the screen, a text message from an unknown number. "Mortgage cleared. Tax liens satisfied. Aldrich's proxies bought out. Consider your debts settled." Ilara stared, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a man. This was a force of nature. You can't just do that," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You can't just buy my debts. I didn't agree to anything." Alessandro's smile hardened, losing all traces of amusement. "You have two choices, Miss Vance. You can allow me to buy your debt, making you beholden to me, ensuring the gallery remains operational under my supervision, and the obsidian heart returns to its rightful owners. Or you can cling to your pride, refuse my assistance, and watch as Aldrich strips away every last vestige of your mentor's legacy, piece by agonizing piece. He will take the gallery, sell off its contents, and leave you with nothing but the dust of shattered dreams. And then he will come for you. Without my protection, you will be utterly exposed." As if on cue, the heavy oak door of the strong room, which Ilara vaguely remembered closing but not locking, swung open silently. Two men, built like stone statues in impeccably tailored suits, stood there. Their faces were impassive, their eyes sharp, scanning the room with a practiced efficiency that spoke of dangerous training. They didn't say a word, didn't move. But their presence, silent and absolute, was a chilling confirmation of Alessandro's power. They had blocked her only exit. There was no escape. A wave of dizzying panic washed over Ilara. The air grew thin, stifling. She was trapped. Trapped by debt, trapped by Aldrich, and now, trapped by this dangerous, all-consuming man who had just casually dismantled her entire financial crisis with a single text message. Her initial defiance crumbled, replaced by a terrifying realization. She had no leverage. None. What does that mean?" She choked out, her voice barely audible. "Beholden to you? Under your supervision." Alessandro stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the subtle heat radiating from his body, could almost taste the power he exuded. His eyes held hers captive. "It means," he murmured, his voice a silken promise and a chilling threat, "that your problems are now my problems. And in my world, Miss Vance, what is mine stays mine, including you and this gallery." He gestured towards the obsidian heart, then towards the surrounding room, a possessive sweep of his hand. Consider this an acquisition. A very personal acquisition. Before she could process the full, terrifying implication of his words, a new notification buzzed on her own phone, clutched forgotten in her other hand. Bank alert. A massive, unimaginable sum had just been deposited into the Aegis Gallery's long-dormant business account. Enough to pay off every debt, every looming threat, and leave a substantial surplus. Her eyes widened, tears pricking at their corners, tears of relief, fear, and a burning, frustrated rage. He hadn't just bought her debt, he had bought her. Alara stared at Alessandro, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Terror warred with an unwilling fascination, anger with a desperate, burgeoning sense of relief. He was a monster, a criminal, a man who had just stolen her autonomy. Yet, he had also offered her a lifeline, a brutal, uncompromising salvation from a fate far worse. She hated him. She feared him. And God help her, a tiny, forbidden part of her felt a spark of something dangerously akin to. He had rescued her, yes, but the price of that rescue, she realized with a sickening lurch, was far more than she could ever imagine. And she was about to pay it. The storm outside might have been easing, but the tempest within her had only just begun. The rain had finally subsided, leaving the Chicago streets slick and glistening under the anemic morning light. But for Alara Vance, the storm within had only just begun. She sat bolt upright in her narrow bed, the crisp, clean sheet the stark reminder of the massive, unasked-for bank transfer that had landed in the gallery's account overnight. No longer a dilapidated haven, the Aegis Gallery was, on paper, solvent. More than solvent. It was thriving. But the cost, Alara knew with a sickening certainty, was far greater than any sum Alessandro Rossi had transferred. She had traded one cage for another, arguably gilded, but a cage nonetheless. The silence in her small apartment above the gallery felt heavier than usual, oppressive, as if the very walls were listening. She could almost smell Alessandro's cologne, the expensive blend of cedar and something undeniably masculine, clinging to the air, a phantom limb of his suffocating presence. She ran a hand through her disheveled hair, the weariness settling deep in her bones. Gratitude was a bitter, poisoned chalice. She should have been relieved, ecstatic even. The gallery was safe. Arthur's legacy, for now, preserved. Yet a fierce, indignant anger simmered beneath the surface of her skin, constant tremor in her hands. He hadn't saved her, he had claimed her. And that distinction felt like a brand burned onto her very soul. By the time she descended the creaking stairs to the gallery floor, the morning light had fully arrived, but it did little to dispel the gloom in her heart. The space, so familiar, now felt alien, scrutinized. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. She had barely unlocked the heavy oak door when a sleek, black sedan, impossibly polished even in the damp street, pulled up silently to the curb. Her breath hitched. Too early for a normal visitor. Too early for anyone but him. The passenger door opened, and a man, impossibly broad-shouldered and radiating quiet intensity, stepped out. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes, though assessing, held no malice, only an unnerving efficiency. He was one of Alessandro's men. Alara recognized him from the night before, a silent sentinel who had materialized in her strong room. He merely nodded, a curt, professional gesture, and took up a position near the entrance, his back to the wall, his gaze sweeping the street with an almost predatory watchfulness. He was a statue carved from granite and menace, and he was in her gallery. Before she could even process this invasion of her personal space, Alessandro himself walked in, not from the car, but from the back alley, as if he had simply manifested from the shadows. He wore a different suit today, a rich, dark blue that made his storm-gray eyes seem even more piercing. He moved with an effortless grace, each step deliberate, possessive. The air around him crackled with a silent, undeniable power. He wasn't merely walking, he was occupying her space, making it his own with every confident stride. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he said, his voice a smooth, deep rumble that curled around her like an unwelcome embrace. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask if she had slept. He simply acknowledged her presence, a formality that somehow felt more insulting than an outright command. His gaze lingered on her face, cool and assessing, before sweeping around the gallery, taking in the freshly paid-off space. A fine establishment. "My men will ensure its continued security." "Your men." Alara's voice, though sharp, trembled slightly. I didn't ask for security. I didn't ask for any of this. She gestured wildly around a gallery, encompassing the man at the door, the gleaming sedan outside, the palpable sense of invasion. Alessandro merely arched a dark brow, a hint of disdain playing on his lips. You asked for protection from Aldrich, did you not? You received it. Now you receive the necessary precautions that come with such an arrangement. In my world, Miss Vance, generosity is never without expectation, and safety is never without its cost. He walked over to her desk, the sacred space where Arthur had worked, and ran a finger over the polished wood. The scent of his cologne filled the small office, suffocating her. He was defiling her sanctuary. This is my gallery, Alara insisted, her voice rising in frustrated defiance. My space. You can't just take over. He turned, his eyes locking onto hers, intense and unyielding. I didn't take it over, Alara. I secured it. From Aldrich. From the banks. From your own inability to manage it. You are free to continue your work. I merely provide the infrastructure. Think of it as a partnership. One I entirely control. His smile was chilling, devoid of warmth. And incidentally, I will be requiring the obsidian heart for safekeeping. It belongs to my family, after all. The audacity of it made her blood boil. Safekeeping. It's been perfectly safe here for decades. And it is not yours until it's appraised and officially transferred, which it hasn't been. Oh, but it has, Alessandro countered, a thin paper-thin smile gracing his lips. He pulled a single crisp legal document from his inner jacket pocket, laying it on her desk with a soft, authoritative thud. It was a pre-signed, predated legal agreement, transferring ownership of the obsidian heart to Alessandro Rossi, witnessed and notarized. Her mentor's name, Arthur Finch, was already there, a shaky, barely legible signature from years ago. A clause, hidden deep within Arthur's original will, allowing for the artifacts returned to the Rossi family under certain conditions. Conditions Alessandro had clearly exploited. Arthur was a man of honor, Miss Vance. He knew where true ownership lay. And he foresaw this day. Alara stared at the document, her vision blurring with indignant tears. He had thought of everything. Every loophole, every angle, every possible avenue of escape, he had meticulously sealed. She was truly, utterly trapped. Her entire life, her career, her very freedom, now hung by a thread controlled by this dangerous, possessive man. Over the next few days, Alessandro's presence became a palpable, suffocating reality. He would appear at unpredictable times, often staying for hours. He never demanded her attention, but his dark eyes followed her, observing her as she moved through the gallery, working on other restorations, cataloging her collection. He would sit in Arthur's old leather armchair, a place she considered sacred, casually browsing art books, his expensive suits a stark contrast to the worn comfort of the furniture. His men, silent and stoic, were always there, positioned discreetly but undeniably, blocking every exit, monitoring every visitor. Alara tried to fight back, quietly at first. She called her old pro bono lawyer, a kind elderly woman named Martha, who had helped her with small contracts. Martha listened patiently, her voice filled with sympathy. Alara, dear, this is far beyond what I can handle. Aldrich is a dangerous man. And Mr. Rossi, his reputation precedes him. You're dealing with forces far too powerful for the legal system to navigate without significant risk. My advice? Be careful. Very, very careful. A day later, Martha called back, her voice strained. I'm sorry, Alara. I have to withdraw. Personal reasons. I wish you the best. The line went dead. Aldrich's reach, or Alessandro's, or perhaps both, extended deeper than she could have imagined. There was no escape. She felt like a bird with clipped wings, fluttering uselessly in a gilded cage. The gallery, once her solace, now felt like a prison. The paid-off debts, a phantom limb. The security, a constant reminder of her lack of freedom. She would catch herself watching Alessandro, a dangerous mix of resentment and an unwilling curiosity twisting in her gut. He was a monster, yes, but a monster who had saved her. And in his dark, unsettling way, he was beginning to claim not just her gallery, but a dangerous, unwelcome corner of her mind. One evening, as she finished cleaning a delicate watercolor, Alessandro stepped close, his shadow falling over her. You are good at what you do, Alara, he said, his voice softer than usual, a subtle shift in its timbre that sent a shiver down her spine. Arthur would be proud. He reached out, not to touch her, but to carefully adjust a stray strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek, his fingers brushing her skin for a fleeting, electrifying second. "Just remember," he whispered, his eyes dark with an unsettling possessiveness. "Now that it is ours, no one will ever touch this gallery again. No one will ever touch you again." The words were a promise and a threat, binding her ever tighter to the dangerous serpent who now owned her. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange, unsettling rhythm, a dance between captivity and a peculiar, unwanted comfort. Alessandro Rossi became a fixture in the Aegis Gallery, his presence a silent, imposing force that Alara couldn't escape, even within the sanctuary of her own mind. He rarely arrived with fanfare, his black sedan often pulling up silently, his men dispersing to their discreet, watchful positions before Alara even registered his arrival. One moment she would be alone, lost in the delicate brushstrokes of a restoration. The next, his shadow would fall over her, the subtle, rich scent of his cologne, a mix of aged leather and raw power, announcing his proximity. He didn't demand her time, yet his dark, piercing gaze followed her, a constant, tangible pressure. She could feel his eyes on her as she moved between easels, as she consulted heavy art history tomes, as she meticulously cleaned a dusty sculpture. It was an unnerving awareness, a feeling of being perpetually observed, dissected, understood in a way that left her exposed. Her initial indignation had softened into a simmering resentment, a constant undercurrent to the bewildering new reality of her life. One morning, she arrived to find a single, exquisite black orchid resting on her desk, its petals dark and velvety, almost impossibly beautiful. Beside it, a first edition of the picture of Dorian Gray, bound in worn leather, its pages filled with elegant script. No note, no explanation, just the silent, undeniable gesture. Alara stared at it, a knot tightening in her stomach. Was this a gift? A warning? A display of his boundless, unsettling resources? The orchid, so rare, so dark, felt like a chilling reflection of the man himself, beautiful, dangerous, and utterly captivating. Did you leave these?" she asked later that day, catching him in the main gallery, scrutinizing a Renaissance portrait with an intensity she usually reserved for her own work. He turned, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "Do you enjoy them, Alara?" he countered, his voice smooth, deflecting. "They're unexpected," she admitted, hugging her arms around herself, suddenly self-conscious. "And the book. It's rare." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of something dangerous and alluring. A fine art, like people, reveals its true depth only to those willing to look beyond the obvious. Dorian Gray, for instance. A fascinating study of beauty, corruption, and the soul's slow decay. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for a moment on her lips. "Perhaps you might find something in it that resonates." And so it began. Not grand declarations, but quiet skirmishes of intellect. He would question her about the provenance of a piece, challenge her interpretation of a symbolism, or offer an obscure historical anecdote about an artist she admired. Alara, initially guarded, found herself drawn into these conversations, her passion for art overriding her fear. He possessed an astonishing depth of knowledge, not just of the art market, but of art history itself, of classical mythology, of philosophies that belied his ruthless exterior. "You know more than you let on," she accused him one afternoon, after a particularly spirited debate about the merits of romanticism versus realism. He had argued for the raw, unvarnished truth, for the unflinching depiction of human struggle, a perspective that, coming from a mafia boss, was both disturbing and profoundly insightful. "One learns to appreciate truth, Alara," he replied, his voice low, his eyes dark with an unreadable emotion. "Especially when surrounded by so much deception." It was in these moments, amidst the hushed reverence of the gallery, that Alara started to see beyond the formidable facade of the mafia boss. She would catch him staring at a particular abstract painting, a swirl of blues and grays, a fleeting shadow of something akin to wistfulness passing over his harsh features. Or she would notice the way his fingers, scarred and powerful, would gently trace the delicate curve of a porcelain vase, a touch surprisingly tender for a man who wielded such brutal authority. One rainy afternoon, as they stood before a restored Byzantine icon, its golden halo gleaming in the dim light, Alara found herself asking, "What does it mean to you? This world you inhabit?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, a reckless foray into his guarded interior. He turned, his gaze intense, assessing. For a long moment he said nothing, and Alara held her breath, fearing she had overstepped, dared to pry too deep. Then his eyes softened, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that sent a strange warmth spreading through her chest. "It means responsibility," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority, revealing a hint of bone-deep weariness she hadn't expected. "A legacy like yours, but one stained by blood and difficult choices. One cannot simply walk away. It consumes you, piece by piece, until you wonder if there's anything left of the man you once were." The raw honesty in his voice, the glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes, struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was a crack in the formidable armor he wore, a chink in the impenetrable fortress of Alessandro Rossi. For the first time, she saw not just the dangerous predator, but a man burdened, perhaps even tormented, by his own inheritance. This realization, however, was terrifying. It wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to hate him, to fear him, to resent his control. Yet, a dangerous current of empathy, of understanding, began to flow between them. She found herself anticipating his visits, her heart doing an unwelcome little flutter whenever his car pulled up. His presence, once suffocating, now brought a strange sense of protective calm, a bulwark against the lurking threat of Aldrich. One evening, as they were discussing the intricate symbolism of a Dutch master, their heads bent close over a heavy art book, their hands accidentally brushed. A spark, sharp and undeniable, jolted through Alara. She pulled back as if burned, her cheeks flushing. Alessandro's eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of that same awareness, a dangerous recognition of the undeniable chemistry that crackled between them. His gaze lingered, possessive and intense, making her pulse quicken. She hated it. Hated the way her body betrayed her. Hated the way her mind, despite her logical resistance, was slowly succumbing to the dangerous allure of him. He was everything she should despise. A manipulator, a powerful, ruthless man who had trapped her. Yet, in the quiet whispers of the gallery, amidst the art they both loved, he was also becoming something else. Something terrifyingly human. Something she was beginning, against all her will, to feel drawn to. And that, more than any debt or any threat from Aldrich, was the most dangerous trap of all. Her heart, once firmly encased in ice, was starting to melt, slowly, dangerously, under the intense, obsessive gaze of the mafia boss who claimed to own her. The fragile truce in Alara's life, a precarious balance between Alessandro's suffocating protection and the insidious threat of Mr. Aldrich, shattered without warning. The subtle whispers of discontent from Aldrich's camp had intensified over the past few weeks. Anonymous calls to the gallery, abruptly ending when Alara answered. Mysterious figures lingering across the street, their presence a silent, chilling accusation. She could feel his anger, a palpable weight pressing down on the neighborhood, a greedy hand closing tighter around its throat. Alessandro's security detail, always present but rarely intrusive, now seemed to multiply, their dark suits a constant, almost comforting presence at the periphery of her vision. But even their stoic vigilance couldn't prevent the inevitable. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Alara arrived at the Aegis Gallery before dawn, the street lamps casting long, skeletal shadows across the empty pavement. A cold, metallic scent, alien and foreboding, pricked her nostrils as she approached the heavy oak door. Her hand, already trembling, fumbled with the keys. The lock, usually stiff, turned with unnerving ease. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. She pushed the door open, the familiar chime above it sounding strangely distorted, a broken lament. Glass crunched beneath her worn boots. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. The main gallery was a scene of controlled chaos, a deliberate desecration. Books, once meticulously shelved, lay scattered across the polished floor like fallen birds, their spines cracked, their pages torn. A small, delicate marble bust, a minor piece from a local sculptor, had been deliberately knocked from its pedestal, its face shattered into a grotesque parody of grief. Easels were overturned, their canvases slashed, not deeply, but enough to render them worthless. It was a message brutal and clear. The air hung heavy with the acrid stench of spray paint. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted to the far wall where a vibrant mural, a celebration of Chicago's artistic heritage painted by one of Arthur's favorite protégés, was now defaced. Scrawled in angry, garish red were 3 words, "This is a warning." Alara sank to her knees amidst the wreckage, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. Tears, hot and furious, welled in her eyes, blurring the ruined beauty around her. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a violation. A deliberate attack on Arthur's memory, on her sanctuary. Aldrich. It had to be him. He was furious that Alessandro had intervened, furious that she hadn't broken. And this was his retribution. Her heart pounded a desperate rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drum of fear and rage. She felt exposed, vulnerable, despite the invisible shield Alessandro had promised. Before she could even contemplate calling the police, a futile gesture, she knew a voice cold and lethal cut through the suffocating silence. What happened here? Alessandro Rossi stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the nascent morning light. He moved through the ruined gallery with the predatory grace of a panther, his eyes, now Arctic gray, sweeping over the devastation. His gaze lingered on the spray-painted threat, then fixed on Alara, kneeling amongst the debris, her face stained with tears. The raw, barely contained fury emanating from him was a tangible force, making the air crackle with unspoken violence. Aldrich, Alara whispered, her voice hoarse, broken. He sent a message. Alessandro knelt before her, not to comfort, but to assess, his presence utterly dominating. His fingers, strong and unyielding, gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. He dares to touch what is mine, he murmured, the words not a question, but a chilling promise of retribution. Are you hurt, Alara? His eyes searched her face, a flicker of something possessive, almost tender, momentarily softening their icy intensity. No, she shook her head, just the gallery. Arthur's things. It's a desecration. The tremor in her hands intensified as she gestured helplessly at the shattered bust, the torn books. Alessandro's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching visibly. He straightened, his gaze now sweeping the room again, meticulous, calculating. Leave it. My men will handle the cleanup. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with swift, practiced precision. A few terse commands, spoken in rapid, clipped Italian, sent his silent sentinels into action. They moved with quiet efficiency, securing the perimeter, taking photographs, their faces grim. Alara watched, a morbid fascination taking hold. This was his world. This was the raw, unvarnished power she had bought into. He turned to her, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. He overestimated himself. He thought he could intimidate you because he cannot touch me. A foolish mistake. What are you going to do? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper, a strange mix of fear and a desperate, almost morbid curiosity. She knew the answer, or a version of it. Alessandro Rossi wasn't one to call the authorities. He was the authority. He merely smiled, a thin, chilling curve of his lips that promised swift, brutal justice. I'm going to remind Mr. Aldrich of the consequences of disturbing what belongs to me. There was no overt threat, no dramatic declaration. Just a quiet, absolute certainty that sent a shiver of dread and an unwilling thrill down her spine. He will learn that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Within the hour, the gallery was a hive of controlled activity. Alessandro's men, a surprisingly diverse group of professionals, some with construction equipment, others with forensics kits, worked with a silent, synchronized efficiency. Shattered glass was swept away, damaged books carefully salvaged, the vandalized mural documented before restoration experts arrived. By midday, a pristine, almost invisible protective film had been applied to the windows, new, reinforced locks installed. It was as if the attack had never happened, except for the lingering smell of chemicals and the indelible scar it left on Alara's soul. Alessandro stayed by her side, not physically, but always within her sight. He made calls, spoke in hushed tones to his lieutenants, his presence a constant, anchoring force in the swirling chaos. Later that evening, after the last of his cleanup crew had departed, leaving the gallery sparkling, strangely devoid of its recent trauma, he approached her. The problem has been addressed, Alara, he said, his voice flat, his eyes unreadable. Aldrich will not trouble you, or this gallery again. Not directly, at least. Alara looked at him, at the dark, powerful man who had effortlessly erased the physical scars of the attack, but not the fear in her heart. She knew with chilling certainty that addressed in Alessandro's world meant something far more permanent, far more terrifying than a warning. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know. The image of the shattered bust, the defaced mural, still burned in her mind. He had protected her, yes. He had saved Arthur's legacy from further desecration. But the fear, The cold horror of witnessing his raw, unfiltered power was just as potent. She was safe. The gallery was intact. But the cost was growing, not just in terms of her autonomy, but in the terrifying realization of who and what protected her. Her dependence on him, a bitter pill she was forced to swallow, was now absolute. She looked at Alessandro, at the man who had just silently waged a war on her behalf, and a new, unsettling emotion stirred within her. A profound, terrifying gratitude, intertwined with a deepening, inescapable fear. She was bound to the serpent, irrevocably, and the threads of that bond, once fragile, were now tightening into an unyielding coil around her heart. The week since Aldrich's warning had settled into a deceptive calm, a hushed quiet that felt more like a held breath than genuine peace. The gallery, meticulously restored by Alessandro's silent, efficient crew, gleamed with an almost unnatural perfection. But for Alara, the lingering scent of disinfectant couldn't mask the faint, phantom smell of sprayed paint, and the sparkling windows couldn't erase the memory of shattered glass. His men, a constant, unobtrusive presence, were now part of the gallery's fabric, their dark suits a subtle counterpoint to the vibrant artwork. She was safe, yes, but the golden cage felt more real than ever. Yet, amidst this new, unsettling reality, a different kind of bond was forging between Alara and Alessandro. Their artistic debates, once intellectual skirmishes, had deepened into explorations of meaning, of beauty, of the very nature of existence. He continued to surprise her, revealing layers of cultured intellect beneath the formidable exterior of a mafia boss. He would bring her obscure texts on ancient art, rare prints she'd only ever seen in academic journals, or even once a small, beautifully bound collection of Rilke's poetry, knowing her quiet admiration for his work. These gestures, devoid of overt romance, spoke of a profound, almost obsessive attention to her inner world. One particularly quiet afternoon, Alara was meticulously cleaning the obsidian heart in the strong room, a task she now performed with a heightened sense of reverence and trepidation. Alessandro was in the main gallery, on a hushed phone call, his voice a low rumble she couldn't quite decipher. The artifact, now residing in a specially designed, climate-controlled display case Alessandro had installed, pulsed with a strange, almost living energy. Its surface, smooth and cold, seemed to absorb the light, reflecting only the darkest depths. As she polished it with a soft cloth, her fingers tracing the intricate ancient glyphs, she noticed something new. A faint, almost invisible seam near the base, expertly disguised. Curiosity, that reckless, persistent trait Arthur had always indulged, seized her. She remembered an old restoration tool, a delicate, almost needle-like probe, designed for minuscule repairs. With painstaking care, she gently inserted the probe into the seam. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. A hidden compartment, barely noticeable, sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a gem or a scroll, but a miniature, tarnished silver locket, no bigger than her thumbnail. And beneath it, a tiny, folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. Alara's heart pounded. This wasn't part of the ancient artifact. This was a recent addition, hidden with intent. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the parchment. The script was elegant, flowing in Italian. Her knowledge of the language was rudimentary, gleaned from art history texts and old opera librettos, but one word leaped out at her, unmistakable, Luca, and beneath it a date that coincided with the approximate time Arthur Finch had acquired the obsidian heart. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Luca, Alessandro's brother. The one Alessandro rarely spoke of, whose memory hung heavy and unspoken between them, a silent ghost in their burgeoning connection. She knew from her own quiet research that Luca Rossi had died tragically, mysteriously years ago. Was this locket, this secret compartment, a silent message from the past, woven into the very fabric of the artifact Alessandro so desperately sought to reclaim? Just then, Alessandro's footsteps sounded in the strong room, purposeful and quiet. Alara instinctively snapped the compartment shut, her heart leaping into her throat. Too late. His eyes, sharp and discerning, had already fixated on her trembling hands, on the slight tremor in the display case, on the barely perceptible glint of silver from the locket she now tried to conceal. Alara! His voice was low, devoid of his usual controlled composure, carrying a dangerous edge she hadn't heard before. What have you found? She hesitated, her gaze flicking between the hidden compartment and his intense, suddenly wary eyes. There was no point in lying. A secret, she whispered, extending her palm, revealing the tiny, tarnished locket. It was hidden inside. Alessandro's face, usually a mask of stoicism, fractured. His eyes widened, a flicker of raw, profound pain flashing through their storm-gray depths. His hand, usually so controlled, trembled slightly as he reached for the locket. He opened it, his strong fingers surprisingly delicate. Inside, 2 miniature photographs, faded with time, a younger Alessandro, perhaps in his late teens, his face etched with a carefree joy she'd never witnessed, standing beside another young man, strikingly similar, with a kind, open smile. Luca. Luca, Alessandro breathed, his voice barely a whisper, thick with an emotion that tore at Alera's heart. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on a locket, his carefully constructed composure crumbling before her eyes. The tough, unyielding mafia boss was gone, replaced by a grieving brother, utterly vulnerable. My brother. He gave it to Arthur for safekeeping, when he was trying to get out. Alera's mind reeled. Get out? Of the family business. Alessandro nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping, revealing a weariness so profound it seemed to pull him down. He wanted to go legitimate. He hated the life, hated what it did to us. He believed there was another way. Cleaner way. He closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Arthur was a friend, a mentor, even to Luca. He was helping him, providing a cover for his attempts to break free. The raw grief in his voice, the unvarnished truth, pierced Alera's carefully constructed defenses. She saw the heavy burden of legacy, of expectations, of a life he hadn't chosen but was forced to carry. And he died trying, she asked, her voice soft with empathy. Alessandro opened his eyes, now clouded with an ancient, unbearable pain. He was murdered. They called it an accident. A boating accident on the lake. But it wasn't. It was a message. A brutal reminder that in our world, there is no getting out, no escape. His voice hardened, a dangerous edge returning. Vincent Torino, Aldrich's old mentor. The same bastards who murdered your father, Alera, were the ones who took my brother. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her father, Luca, both victims of the same ruthless, intertwined criminal empire. The invisible threads connecting them, once so tenuous, suddenly tightened, drawing them into a shared tapestry of grief and vengeance. You live with this every day? Alera whispered, a profound wave of compassion washing over her. She had seen him as the orchestrator of her captivity, a symbol of the world that had stolen her father. Now she saw him as a man, broken by the same darkness, burdened by the same unpunished injustice. He finally looked at her, his eyes, still filled with pain, now held a new depth, a desperate, unspoken plea for understanding. Every single day. The weight of it. The responsibility. To keep the empire afloat, to protect what little remains of my family, to make sure no one else suffers, and to find justice for Luca, even if it means becoming the very monster he despised. His voice dropped to a near whisper, raw and unguarded. Sometimes, Alera, I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the man staring back. I wonder if there's anything left of the boy who once dreamed of something else. His confession, so stark, so utterly vulnerable, shattered Alera's remaining defenses. She saw his deep, profound loneliness, a desolate landscape within a man of immense power. Beneath the impenetrable facade of the mafia boss, the ruthless billionaire, was a soul scarred by loss, haunted by a legacy he never wanted, carrying the crushing weight of a family he had to protect at all costs. She, too, understood that burden, that aching responsibility for Arthur's legacy, for the gallery. Her own loneliness, a constant companion since Arthur's death, echoed his. What did you dream of? She asked, her voice soft, tentative, reaching out to the wounded man before her. A faint, almost wistful smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of that long-lost boy. Peace. Simplicity. A life where I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder. Where I could appreciate beauty without calculating its strategic value. His gaze, filled with a newfound tenderness, met hers. And you, Alera? What did you dream of before all this? To just create, she admitted, her own voice breaking. To bring beauty to the world, to make Arthur proud. To have a quiet life, filled with art and quiet moments. To feel safe, truly safe, without the shadow of debt or danger. In that moment, standing in a hushed, strong room, surrounded by ancient artifacts, and the ghosts of their shared pasts, their fears and their hidden dreams intertwined. The protective wall Alara had built around her heart, so fiercely guarded, crumbled. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about connection. About seeing the soul beneath the surface. About two broken people, bound by circumstance, finding a fragile solace in each other's vulnerability. Alessandro reached out, his hand, no longer trembling, gently cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, possessive, yet filled with a tenderness that stole her breath. Perhaps, he murmured, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers, intense and unwavering. Perhaps together we can still find a way to create that peace. To make those dreams real. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-light touch that sent shivers through her. The air between them crackled, no longer with tension, but with a burgeoning, undeniable desire. Alara knew, with absolute certainty, that her relationship with Alessandro had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer just about survival or obligation. It was about something deeper, something terrifyingly, exhilaratingly real. A love, born in the shadows, nurtured by shared pain, was beginning to bloom, fragile yet fiercely resilient, between the art curator and her mafia boss. The air in the glittering ballroom of the prestigious Fairmont Hotel hung heavy with the cloying scent of lilies and privilege, a stark contrast to the familiar aroma of old paper and paint thinner in Alara's gallery. Chandeliers dripped crystal light onto a sea of perfectly coiffed heads and designer gowns, reflecting off polished silverware and expensive champagne flutes. This was Mr. Aldrich's world, a stage of pristine, superficial elegance, and Alara felt acutely out of place. She wore her best, a simple black dress that had seen better days, a silent rebellion against the opulent excess that suffocated her. She was here only because the obsidian heart, though not for sale, was subtly featured as a special exhibit in a high-profile art history presentation, a strategic move by Alessandro to draw attention, or so he'd said. He had assured her he would be there, a silent guardian in the shadows, his presence a comforting shield against the insidious undercurrents of the art world. But he was nowhere to be seen. A prickle of unease snaked its way up Alara's spine. The polite chatter, the tinkling of ice, the forced smiles, it all felt like a thin veneer over something predatory and waiting. She scanned the room, her gaze darting through the throng of wealthy patrons, searching for Alessandro's unmistakable dark silhouette, his piercing storm-gray eyes. Nothing. Only the vacant faces of strangers and the occasional, fleeting glance from Aldrich himself, a smile of chilling satisfaction playing on his lips as he greeted influential guests. Her heart began to pound with a frantic, sickening rhythm. Where is he? A sudden gnawing doubt, cold and sharp, began to burrow into her consciousness. Had he abandoned her? Was this all part of a larger game, one she still didn't fully comprehend? The thought twisted her stomach, a bitter taste rising in her throat. The auctioneer, a man with an unctuous smile and a voice that boomed with practiced joviality, introduced the guest speaker. It was Mr. Aldrich. Alara stiffened, her muscles tensing. This was it. The trap. He ascended the podium, his tailored suit immaculate, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights. His smile, usually so smooth, seemed to hold a new malevolent edge as his eyes found hers across the crowded room. A chill, colder than any Chicago winter, ran through her. Ladies and gentlemen, Aldrich began, his voice resonating with false sincerity. We are here tonight to celebrate art, beauty, and the noble pursuit of preserving our cultural heritage. However, his tone shifted, growing serious, almost somber. Sometimes, even in our most esteemed institutions, corruption rears its ugly head. And it is our duty, as stewards of this heritage, to expose it. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Alara felt a tremor of fear, a premonition of disaster. His gaze locked onto hers, burning with undisguised malice. It pains me deeply to reveal, Aldrich continued, his voice dripping with feigned sorrow, that one such institution, the Aegis Gallery, a place we all believe stood for integrity, has been compromised. Its current curator, Miss Alara Vance, has not only neglected her duties but has, dare I say, engaged in outright fraud and embezzlement. The words hit Alara like a physical blow, stealing her breath. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by a chorus of whispers. Her face flushed scarlet, a burning wave of public humiliation washing over her. Fraud? Embezzlement? It was a lie. A monstrous, calculated lie. We have uncovered undeniable evidence, Aldrich declared, holding up a thick manila folder. Forged invoices. Misappropriated funds. Dubious transactions with known criminal entities. All meticulously documented, I assure you. He gestured to a large screen behind him where images flashed, doctored bank statements with her signature, fabricated emails, even grainy, distorted photographs showing her in conversation with Alessandro's men. Their dark suits made it look sinister, a clear implication of illegal dealings. It appears Miss Vance has been using her mentor's beloved gallery as a front for illicit activities, siphoning off its assets and associating with Chicago's most unsavory elements. Alara's world tilted. Her heart pounded so violently it felt like it would burst through her chest. The gallery. Arthur's legacy. He was destroying it, destroying her in front of this entire judgmental audience. Her gaze frantically swept the room again, desperately searching for Alessandro. Nothing. No dark suit. No piercing eyes. Just the sea of shocked, accusatory faces. And to make matters worse, Aldrich continued, his voice now imbued with a righteous fury. It has come to our attention that Miss Vance has been attempting to illegally transfer priceless artifacts, including the coveted obsidian heart, to shadowy figures in the underworld, undermining the very trust placed in her care. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the accusations hang heavy in the air, poisoning every ear. Therefore, effective immediately, by court order, he held up a legitimate-looking document, its seal glinting under the lights. The Aegis Gallery, along with all its contents, is to be seized. Its assets frozen. And its entire collection, including all of Arthur Finch's treasured works, will be auctioned off to repay the substantial damages incurred by this blatant betrayal of public trust. The pronouncement crashed over Alara, a tidal wave of devastation. Seized, auctioned, Arthur's life's work, his legacy, reduced to a pawn's in Aldrich's greedy game. The horror of it was a physical agony, tearing at her soul. Her vision tunneled. She swayed, the glittering ballroom dissolving into a blur of condemning faces. Miss Vance, a stern voice cut through her despair. Two men in crisp police uniforms, their faces impassive, stood beside her. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. One of them roughly grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. No, this is a lie. He's lying. Alara cried out, her voice raw with desperation, but was lost in the indignant murmurs of the crowd. Some averted their gaze, others openly stared, their expressions a mix of shock and condemnation. No one believed her. No one helped. As the officers began to lead her away, through the gaping, horrified crowd, Alara's eyes darted one last time, a frantic, desperate plea, searching for Alessandro. He had promised. He had promised protection. He had promised justice. His words, "What is mine stays mine," now echoed in her mind, a cruel mockery. Where was he? Had he orchestrated this? Had he used her gallery, her pain, as a pawn in his own, even darker game, only to discard her when she was no longer useful? The terrifying thought twisted her gut, a betrayal far more profound than any Aldrich could inflict. Her legs felt like lead, her every step agonizing. The rough hands on her arms, the flashing camera lights of opportunistic reporters, the sneering satisfaction on Aldrich's face as he watched her humiliation. Everything blurred. She was alone. Utterly, irrevocably alone. Alessandro was gone. He had vanished like a shadow, leaving her exposed, broken, and betrayed in the most public, devastating way imaginable. The cuffs, cold and unforgiving, clicked around her wrists, sealing her fate, confirming her abandonment. Her heart, once so carefully guarded, now lay shattered amidst the ruins of her dreams, utterly convinced that the man who had claimed to save her had, in the end, betrayed her most completely. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Alara's wrists, a brutal, unforgiving reality. Each clink of the metal echoed the shattering of her dreams, the complete and utter demolition of her reputation. The rough hands of the corrupt officers propelled her forward, past the rows of stunned, gossiping faces, past the flash of reporters' cameras that felt like blinding stabs. The humiliation was a living, breathing thing, wrapping its icy tendrils around her heart, squeezing until she could barely breathe. Aldrich's triumphant smirk, a grotesque distortion of civility, was the last image seared into her mind. He won. The thought was a bitter, poison draught, confirming her deepest fear. Alessandro, the man who had woven himself into the fabric of her desperate hope, had vanished. He had abandoned her, betrayed her, leaving her to drown in the very mire he had promised to save her from. Her vision, blurred by unshed tears and the relentless glare of the spotlights, registered nothing but a swirling abyss of despair. The murmurs of the crowd, once a cacophony of judgment, now seemed distant, muffled by the roaring in her ears. She was being led to the service exit, her public execution almost complete, her life as she knew it over. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but her spirit, ravaged and broken, had given up the fight. Then a ripple. Not a gasp, but a sudden, profound shift in the collective consciousness of the room. The murmurs died. Heads turned, a slow, collective pivot, not towards the podium, but towards the main entrance. A hush, so absolute it vibrated with unspoken awe, descended upon the ballroom. Alara, her head bowed in shame, felt it, a sudden vacuum of sound, a prickling sensation on her skin. She risked a glance. And then she saw him. Alessandro Rossi. He stood framed in the grand archway, a figure carved from darkness and undeniable authority, utterly unhurried, utterly commanding. He wore a tuxedo tonight, immaculate, blacker than the deepest shadow, a stark contrast to the glittering chandeliers and the pale faces of the elite. His dark hair was perfectly swept back, his storm-gray eyes, usually so guarded, now burned with an incandescent fury that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't injured. He was simply there, a terrifying, breathtaking vision of power incarnate. The two officers holding Alara's arms faltered, their grip loosening imperceptibly. Their eyes, once hard and dismissive, now flickered with a raw, primal fear. Alessandro moved, a slow, deliberate walk that felt more like a glide. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. Every step was a declaration, a reclaiming of the space, of the narrative. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft click of his expensive shoes on the polished marble. His gaze, lethal and unwavering, found Alara, then swept to Aldrich, still standing smugly at the podium, his face now blanching, a flicker of genuine terror replacing his earlier triumph. "It seems, Mr. Aldrich," Alessandro's voice cut through the silence, rich and deep, carrying a chilling calm that somehow made it more terrifying, "that you've made a grave error in judgment. You've dared to touch what is not yours." Aldrich, pale as a ghost, stammered, "Mr. Rossi, what is the meaning of this? This woman is a criminal." The gallery is seized. Alessandro merely raised a hand, a gesture of absolute dismissal that silenced Aldrich mid-sentence. He approached the podium, not as a guest, but as a king reclaiming his throne. He didn't ask permission. He simply took control. "Miss Vance is many things," Alessandro stated, his gaze briefly meeting Alara's, a flash of possessive warmth in their icy depths that sent a shiver of shock and a strange, desperate hope through her. "But a criminal is not one of them. Unlike you, Mr. Aldrich." He reached into his tuxedo jacket, pulling out not one, but two sleek, identical tablets. With a gesture, he tossed one to a man in the front row, a distinguished-looking gentleman Alara recognized as a high-ranking federal prosecutor, and the other to a woman in a discreet corner whose sharp, intelligent eyes now fixed on Alessandro with intense focus, a genuine FBI agent, Alara realized with a jolt. "For your immediate review," Alessandro announced, his voice carrying effortlessly, filling every corner of the vast room. "You will find comprehensive documentation of Mr. Aldrich's activities. Shell corporations laundering money through his real estate ventures. Tax evasion on a scale that would make a cartel blush. Extortion. Bribery." And his voice dropped, turning cold as a winter grave, "the meticulous orchestration of your father's accident, Miss Vance, and my brother's boating tragedy. Both meticulously planned to remove obstacles to his insatiable greed." Images and documents, crisp and undeniable, began to flash on the large screen behind Aldrich. Not the doctored photos Aldrich had presented, but genuine, undeniable evidence. Bank transfers, property deeds, surveillance photos of Aldrich meeting with known enforcers, recorded phone calls detailing payoffs, even signed affidavits from terrified witnesses Alessandro had clearly persuaded. The sheer volume and detail of the evidence were staggering, overwhelming. It painted a devastating, ruthless portrait of Aldrich's vast, corrupt empire, far more extensive and sinister than anyone had imagined. The crowd erupted in a horrified gasp. The prosecutor's face, as he scrolled through the tablet, turned from disbelief to grim certainty. The FBI agent's expression hardened, her hand already moving towards her ear, presumably activating her comms. Aldrich, meanwhile, stood frozen, his smug facade utterly shattered. His face was a mask of shock, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated terror. Lies. All lies. This is defamation. He's a criminal. He's trying to frame me, he shrieked, his voice cracking, desperate. Alessandro ignored him, his gaze, now colder than ever, fixed on the man. And as for your claim on the Aegis Gallery, Mr. Aldrich, Alessandro continued, his voice dripping with contempt. A baseless accusation designed to cover your own tracks. The gallery is not, and never was, Miss Vance's burden. It is mine. He walked over to Alara, effortlessly pushing aside the two now paralyzed officers. His strong hands reached for her wrists, his touch surprisingly gentle as he unlocked the handcuffs with small, impossibly delicate key that seemed to appear from nowhere. The metallic click echoed like a tiny victory. He took Alara's freed hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a possessive, almost intimate gesture that sent a jolt through her. Her breath hitched. His eyes, burning with a ferocious intensity, swept over the stunned crowd, then landed on Aldrich, whose knees were now visibly trembling. The Aegis Gallery, Alessandro declared, his voice ringing with absolute, unyielding ownership, is now and forever the property of the Rossi family. And Miss Alara Vance, he paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, his gaze sweeping over her face, possessive and utterly devoted, is under my personal protection. Anyone who dares to threaten her, or what is now ours, will face consequences far beyond the reach of any court. His eyes, dark with a promise of retribution, returned to Aldrich, who crumpled, finally, under the weight of his gaze. You touched my property, Aldrich, and you dared to humiliate her. You will regret this day until your last breath. Alara stared at Alessandro, her mind reeling. Relief, so overwhelming it made her knees weak, washed over her, followed by a dizzying wave of shock and a strange, intoxicating warmth. He hadn't abandoned her. He had orchestrated this. Every single, meticulously planned detail. He had allowed her to fall into Aldrich's trap, only to smash that trap and Aldrich himself into 1,000 irreparable pieces, not with a bullet, but with a calculated, devastating display of his absolute power and intelligence. The FBI agents, now moving with purposeful efficiency, converge on Aldrich, reading him his rights as he babbled incoherently about conspiracy and lies. The corrupt police officers who had tried to arrest Alara were now being quietly, efficiently detained by other agents. The crowd, a silent tableau of stunned elites, watched, utterly mesmerized. Alessandro turned fully to Alara, his hand still holding hers, his thumb gently stroking her skin. His storm-gray eyes, still burning with residual anger for what Aldrich had done, now softened, filled with a deep, possessive tenderness that stole her breath. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. His presence, his unwavering gaze, his powerful claim, spoke volumes. Mine, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble meant only for her, his eyes sweeping over her face, memorizing every detail, every lingering trace of fear, every spark of renewed hope. You are mine, Alara. And no one will ever harm what is mine. The words were a brand, a promise, a declaration of absolute ownership. She was saved. Utterly, undeniably, gloriously saved. And in that moment, as she looked into the dark, protective depths of his eyes, she knew, with a certainty that transcended fear and logic, that being claimed by this dangerous, obsessive man was exactly where she belonged. The world might have just witnessed Aldrich's downfall, but Alara had just witnessed her own spectacular, terrifying, and utterly inevitable redemption in the spotlight of Alessandro's absolute claim. The aftermath of the auction was a dizzying blur of flashing lights, terse questions from genuine federal agents, and the stunned silence of the once judgmental elite. Aldrich, his empire crumbling around him, was led away in handcuffs, his furious, defeated face a grotesque parody of his former smugness. His carefully constructed world, built on corruption and exploitation, had imploded with the brutal efficiency of Alessandro's meticulous planning. The corrupt officers who had attempted to arrest Alara were also apprehended, their venal complicity exposed by the sheer weight of Alessandro's evidence. The swift, decisive fall of Aldrich was a testament to the quiet, terrifying power of the man who now held Alara's hand. Alessandro led Alara away from the chaos, past the hushed whispers and astonished stares, out into the cool, crisp Chicago night. His grip on her hand was firm, anchoring her to reality as her mind reeled from the public humiliation and the staggering, spectacular rescue. The exhaustion, both emotional and physical, threatened to pull her under. She felt numb, detached, a ghost moving through the bustling city. They didn't go back to the gallery. Instead, Alessandro took her to a secluded penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a lavish, silent sanctuary high above the city's roar. It was a space of muted elegance, expensive art gracing the walls, panoramic windows offering breathtaking views of the sparkling cityscape. But Alara barely noticed. She sank onto a plush velvet sofa, the tremors that had been suppressed finally asserting themselves, her body shaking uncontrollably. The tears, held back for too long, finally came, hot and furious, a torrent of shame, relief, and utter exhaustion. Alessandro sat beside her, not touching, not speaking, simply being. His presence, once so intimidating, now felt like a solid, unwavering anchor in her shattered world. He waited patiently, silently, as she wept, allowing her the space to purge the public humiliation, the lingering fear, the bitter taste of betrayal. When her sobs finally subsided, leaving her raw and drained, he offered her a glass of cool water. "I'm sorry, Alara," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, filled with a sincerity that pierced her heart. "I regret the pain you endured, the public ordeal. It was a necessary cruelty. To ensure his complete downfall, he needed to feel invincible, to expose his depravity in public. But it was never meant to hurt you." His storm-gray eyes, usually so fierce, held a profound regret, a shadow of the vulnerability she had glimpsed in the strong room. "No one touches what is mine. No one touches you." He paid for that transgression. Alara looked at him, at the man who had orchestrated her public humiliation to secure a greater justice, who had allowed her to suffer in order to achieve a resounding victory. The anger was still there, a faint ember, but was overshadowed by an immense gratitude, a profound understanding. She knew he regretted her pain. She saw it in his eyes, in the subtle clenching of his jaw. This was his world, brutal and uncompromising, and he had used its rules to protect her. What happened to Aldrich?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Alessandro's lips curved into a thin, grim smile, devoid of humor. "He is where he belongs. And his associates, those who aided in his schemes, those who dared to threaten you, are also facing their own reckonings. No direct violence," he clarified, sensing her unspoken question. "Nothing that would leave a trace for the authorities to pursue. But their businesses are disappearing. Their assets are frozen in ways no one can trace back to me. Their influence, their power, their very names are being systematically erased. They will find themselves utterly alone, without resources, without allies. They will lose everything they hold dear, just as they try to make you lose yours." The chilling efficiency of his retribution sent a shiver down her spine. This was the mafia boss in full force. Not with overt bloodshed, but with a calculated, devastating dismantling of his enemies' lives. It was ruthless, absolute, and undeniably effective. And she realized, utterly protective of her. Over the next few days, Alessandro remained a constant, steadfast presence. He didn't hover, but he was always there, a silent sentinel against the lingering shadows of fear. He brought her simple, comforting meals, played soft classical music in the penthouse, and encouraged her to sketch, to read, to slowly, carefully begin the process of healing. He didn't pressure her for anything, allowing her space to process the trauma, to simply be. His quiet strength was a balm to her battered soul. Alara began to emerge from the haze of shock. The vivid nightmares of Aldrich's sneering face, of the crushing handcuffs, slowly receded. She started to talk, sharing the anxieties that still plagued her, the feeling of vulnerability, the gnawing doubt about her place in this new, dangerous world. Alessandro listened, his storm-gray eyes always attentive, never dismissive. He understood the concept of a legacy and the sacred trust it entailed. "The Aegis Gallery," she said one evening, sketching absent-mindedly in a notebook. "It was more than just a business. It was a symbol. A place of hope, of beauty, a defiance against the ugliness of the world." Alessandro nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "It still can be, Alara, but stronger, more resilient. A fortress built not just for art, but for the community." Arthur's vision amplified, and so the idea was born. Not just rebuilding, but reimagining. With Alessandro's boundless resources and silent influence, the Aegis Gallery began its true rebirth. The space was expanded, incorporating the adjacent, now empty buildings that Aldrich had once sought to acquire. It became more than just a gallery. It transformed into a vibrant community center. Art workshops for underprivileged children. Legal aid clinics for those battling unscrupulous landlords. support groups for families affected by the very kind of violence and corruption that had defined their lives. Alara, with Alessandro's unwavering support, poured her heart and soul into this new vision. She curated new exhibits, bringing in local artists whose voices often went unheard. She designed educational programs, ensuring that art, beauty, and knowledge were accessible to everyone. The joy of creation, the purpose that had been so cruelly stolen, began to rekindle within her, burning brighter than ever before. She found her own voice, her own strength, not in defiance of Alessandro, but in partnership with him. She saw Alessandro differently now. He was still the dangerous mafia boss, his power absolute, his methods ruthless. But he was also the man who had wept over his brother's locket, the man who listened patiently to her fears, who quietly ensured her safety, who supported her dreams with an almost religious devotion. He was her protector, her anchor, a formidable partner in both love and justice. She had accepted her destiny, her dangerous, thrilling, all-consuming love for him. He had saved her, broken her, and then slowly, patiently, helped her rebuild herself, stronger, more purposeful, and irrevocably bound to his dark, powerful heart. The Aegis Gallery, once a symbol of her struggle, was now a testament to their improbable, beautiful, and utterly dangerous love. It was a rebirth, not just of a place, but of a soul, finally finding peace in the eye of the storm. 6 months that painted a new vibrant canvas over the scarred facade of the Aegis Gallery. The air inside, once heavy with the scent of decay and despair, now hummed with the lively chatter of children, the soft murmur of adult conversations, and the distinct, invigorating aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint, comforting tang of oil paints. Sunlight, no longer filtered through grimy panes, streamed through sparkling, reinforced windows, bathing the expanded space in a golden, hopeful glow. The Aegis Gallery, once a relic teetering on the brink of oblivion, had been reborn. It was now a thriving cultural hub, a defiant symbol of rebirth in a neighborhood that had fought tooth and nail against gentrification. On one side, local artists displayed their bold, evocative works, their stories finding a voice on the pristine walls. On the other, brightly colored mats and small tables hosted children's art workshops, their joyful laughter echoing through the halls. In a quieter corner, a discreet legal aid clinic offered counsel to those exploited by figures like Aldrich, while upstairs, support groups for families touched by the pervasive shadows of organized crime found solace and strength. This was Alara's vision, brought to fruition with Alessandro's formidable, unwavering support. Alara Vance, no longer the terrified, struggling curator, moved through the bustling space with a newfound confidence that radiated from her very core. Her simple dress, often smudged with paint or clay, seemed to glow with an inner light. Her hands, once trembling with fear, now moved with purposeful grace, guiding a young artist, discussing a legal case, or simply sharing a warm smile with a mother seeking advice. She had found her voice, not just in art, but in advocacy and community. She was still Alara, the art curator, but now she was also a force, a quiet, formidable power within Alessandro's world. Her relationship with Alessandro had blossomed, deepening into a profound, complicated tapestry of love, respect, and an undeniable, consuming possessiveness that she had, remarkably, come to cherish. He was still Alessandro Rossi, the mafia boss. His suits were still impeccable, his eyes still held a dangerous glint, and his world still operated in shadows she would never fully comprehend. His men, discreetly placed, still watched, still protected. But his actions, his decisions, his very presence, were now undeniably shaped by her morality, her vision. He wielded his power not just for conquest, but for protection, for justice, for the flourishing of the sanctuary she had created. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Alara finalized the arrangements for a new exhibit, a collection of urban street art celebrating resilience, Alessandro entered, a single, exquisite black orchid held delicately in his large hand. Its petals were of velvet so dark they seemed to absorb the light, a stark, breathtaking beauty. He also carried 2 steaming cups of her favorite artisanal coffee, the rich aroma cutting through the faint scent of paint in the air. Perfect timing, he murmured, his voice a low, melodic rumble, a sound that now resonated deep within her soul. He handed her the coffee, then presented the orchid, his storm-gray eyes, so often calculating, now filled with a warmth and devotion that made her heart ache with fierce, undeniable love. "For you, Alara." She took the orchid, its cool, smooth petals brushing her fingertips. It was the same flower he had left on her desk all those months ago, a silent, unsettling promise that had now bloomed into a radiant reality. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her gaze meeting his, a smile of profound understanding gracing her lips. "And so perfectly us." He returned her smile, that slow, devastating curve of his mouth that still had the power to make her knees weak. His gaze swept over the thriving gallery, over the vibrant art, the smiling faces, then settled on her, intense and all-consuming. "Mine," he murmured, the word no longer a brutal declaration of ownership, but a tender, unwavering promise of forever. But this time, it wasn't a demand. It was a shared understanding, a mutual truth forged in fire and faith. Alara leaned into his touch as he gently cupped her cheek, her hand rising to meet his. She knew she was his. Utterly, irrevocably, gloriously his. But in that very possession, she had found an unparalleled freedom. The freedom to build, to create, to advocate, to love without fear. He didn't clip her wings, he simply provided a secure, unyielding sky for her to soar. "Always yours, Alessandro," she replied, her voice soft but filled with an unshakable conviction. "And you mine." He kissed her then, a slow, deep, possessive kiss that tasted of rich coffee, of unspoken promises, of a future carved from the ruins of their past. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of a man clinging to survival, but the confident, profound kiss of a man who had found his masterpiece, his true purpose, in the heart of the woman he loved. 6 months had passed, and the echoes of Aldrich's betrayal, of the auction's public shame, were faint, distant memories. Vincent Torino was gone, his dark influence erased. The Aegis Gallery, Alara's enduring legacy, was a testament to how art, love, and unwavering courage could defy even the darkest shadows. And Alessandro, the mafia boss who had saved her from a deadly trap and claimed her heart, stood by her side, his hand intertwined with hers, a silent, powerful promise of a lifetime spent creating a masterpiece of their own. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked, his eyes glinting with a future full of unknown adventures, yet utterly secure in their shared destiny. He gestured towards the new wing of the gallery, already buzzing with plans for expansion. Alara squeezed his hand, her heart overflowing with a fierce, unbreakable joy. "Always my love," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. Outside, the city of Chicago continued its relentless hum, unaware of the profound, powerful love story unfolding within the walls of the Aegis Gallery, a love born of danger and desire, transformed into a masterpiece of unbreakable devotion. Sometimes, our greatest works of art aren't found on canvas, but within the depths of our own resilience. Alara's journey reminds us that true worth isn't defined by what you lose, but by what you fiercely protect within your heart. It's about finding a love that sees your scars not as flaws, but as the intricate etchings of a magnificent, unbreakable spirit. If this story touched a part of your soul, if it reminded you that even in the darkest shadows, love can heal and claim you completely, then join our community. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of fierce devotion, and comment below with "I am unbreakable" to share your strength.